It is so much fun to get to talk to somebody whose name you've heard for years, whose writing you've read for years. And when fate lets that happen, or when friends say, why don't you talk to this person, it's super when you can. Carolina Milanesi is the president of Creative Strategies. She is an analyst at Creative Strategies. As I say, she's somebody I've been following for years, but let's let everybody else in on who you are and what you do. First of all, thank you very much for joining us.
I appreciate you asking me. It's delightful to be on, and I don't want to disclose how long I've been doing this job. I've been telling by a long time. I started my analyst career at Gartner. I was there for about 14 years. I was VP on the devices side, so I was covering everything that was PC, tablets, and all the rest of it. And then I had a quick time at Cantor World Panel, which is a primary kind of research company. I was heading up their US business. And then in 2016, I believe, is when Ben Beharing at Creative Strategy and myself started talking. And, we are a kindred spirit. I always joke and say we finish each other's sentences, but sandwiches, as in Frozen, for the ones that have kids and watch the movie like 17 million times. We got together, we see the industry very much alike, and we think about the role of the analyst in a very similar way. So I started there. And in 2019, I also created my own company called The Heart of Tech, where I focus more on ESG. So I look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sustainability and social impact. And if you like, the role of technology and society, the intersection of that, because especially now with AI, there's a lot that is going to impact us as human beings going forward. So that's where my passion really is.
So I wanted to have you on to sort of do, I don't want to say a post-mortem because it's an ugly term, but to do a post-mortem for WWDC. And yet, most of the questions I have for you are about AI because this was the AI year for WWDC. Now, you and I were talking beforehand about, I can't think of the right wording, but basically, if you look at a technology and say, well, that's stupid and it's not going to fly, it's not the technology that's going to fly. It's maybe time for you to ground yourself, at least for a minute or two. So I'm gonna play devil's advocate, or I'm gonna play old man. I don't know which I'm doing, but can you please make the case for me for AI in our daily lives? And I'm not saying I don't think there's a place. I'm saying if you were talking to somebody who said, this is never gonna, make that case.
For me, the real value of AI is that it's going to empower every technology user to become a power user. There's a lot of talk around what's the killer app, and I don't think about it that way. And there are some people that talk about AI and the killer app being, or the killer use case being, saving time. And I kind of get a little bit, because especially in a corporate setting, that saving time is not for me, right? It's usually for my employer. And that means that they're going to ask me to work more on something else. So I don't know that that necessarily speaks to me. But the idea that I can now interact with technology in an easier way, in a way that puts me in control of how I interact versus the machine that I'm using dictating how I need to interact with it in order to get the return that I want. That to me is why somebody should look at AI enabled experiences, because they can get more out of whatever it is that they're going to be doing. Does that convince you?
Well, I mean, it's not about convincing me. I will say there was something I saw, I think it was on Mastodon the other day or someplace, where somebody said, I want AI to do my laundry and my cleaning so that I can spend more time painting and writing, not the other way around. Which was an interesting thing to see in what Apple talked about at WWDC. I mean, they have things like, we're going to help clean up your writing, we're going to draw pictures for you. Well, let me go a couple of ways. I mean, first of all, the question I had prepared for you is on a scale of boring to breathtaking. Where do you put Apple Intelligence?
Um, right in the middle, I think. I don't think that is boring, for sure. Is it breathtaking? Well, the proof is in the pudding, right? I want to experience some of these new features that they have. I do think that what makes it specific to Apple and where the value, in my opinion, is more real for users is that is contextual. Apple, I always argue, is that brand that has consumers' trust without really much question. And with that, the fact that AI is only as smart as the data that AI can rely on. If you put the two together and you have, consumers or users that trust Apple and therefore are willing to share that data so that Apple Intelligence can really give me a return that is personal, is contextual, and in that is private as well. That is why I think you're definitely not boring. You're on your way to being breathtaking, but we'll have to see as we start using it.
Okay, again, as is almost always the case, there are a couple of directions I want to go from there. I had this idea just in the past day or so that I think I put out on Mac OS Ken. I can't remember. I wonder if Apple Intelligence is kind of the way Apple Watch ended up evolving and sort of the way we're kind of seeing Apple Vision Pro right now of here's this amazing mass of tools that we have and we're going to put it down in front of you, and then Apple's going to sit back with like a clipboard and figure out how people are actually going to use it or try to use it and then focus that way. Because the sizzle reel at WWDC was, again, like I say, it can clean up your writing, it can write pictures for you, it can do Genmoji. Oh, by the way, you'll also be able to tell Siri to do 9 things at once, and it will do them without you having to give 9 different commands. That to me is the real magic of it, but that doesn't look magical. And so the magical thing is, look, you can make yourself look like a duck or something like that. I mean, am I right in thinking that they're kind of, I don't want to say Trojan horse, I don't want to say fooling people, but are we getting these fun little cute things that you can do? And the real, I mean, once you get comfortable with that, then the real thing is suddenly you're talking to Siri like it's a person instead of that idiot thing over there that I have to tell 9 times what I want.
I think that you're spot on, and in my commentary, I've been talking about how we're trying to make sense of AI as a whole, and then people are probably going to just go and say, "I want the iPhone that does the Gemojis," right? There's always some, and Apple has been pretty good at that historically to give you that hook that is pretty simple, and also doesn't make you question, especially from a privacy perspective with AI, right? Whether or not you can trust this thing. And exactly to your point, as I get playing with the Gemoji or the fact that I can now send you a birthday card that has your face and likeness versus a generic picture, those kind of things that seem harmless. And then I get to the point where I do trust Siri to look at my calendar, to tell me at what time my plane is departing, at what time therefore I need to leave my home and call an Uber and all these things, right? And that was a point I made. I wrote an article for Creative Strategies where I said it was actually interesting that Apple did not give that part of Siri a new name. It's just Siri, right? It's an enhanced version of Siri versus calling it Recall, as Microsoft did,
Right.
and creating a new entity that, as a user, I'm starting to learn how to use, but I'm not quite sure if I can trust it because I don't necessarily link it to Microsoft, which is a brand that I trust. And so I think that, for a company like Apple that names everything, because they do, like even things that others have had in the market, they name them slightly differently. It was fascinating to me to see that they didn't actually name this. They just put it under the new capabilities of Siri.
Sure. Well, I mean, it seems to me that it's kind of evolving theoretically into what they always wanted Siri to be. I mean, I don't know what we expected from Apple however many years ago. What, 2011, I think, is when they bought and folded in Siri. I don't know how we expected that that was going to be the HAL 9000, except hopefully without killing you. I mean, as many years ago as it was, because we're finally getting to that place now.
Yeah.
I don't know. You also said one other thing really quickly. I would love to read the book about how they decided to go public with Recall and call it Recall and not think that that was going to be a disaster. But that's another thing for another thing. So, heading into WWDC, there were a lot of people who were saying, and probably there still are, Apple is late to the AI game.
Mm.
Agree or disagree?
I disagree because, first of all, Apple has been doing AI for a long time. And I think that, that is a general statement that actually applies to generative AI. Because obviously, even if you listen to the keynote, they talked about machine learning, they talked about algorithm, the things that they've been doing. They don't have an NPU, they have a neural engine. So, things that they had for so long, they just weren't talking about it in the way that Microsoft started talking about it and Google started talking about it. So were they late? No. And they also came with a system wide experience, which is, I'm sure they could have given you some of the features from Siri a year ago if they wanted to, right? But the beauty of Apple Intelligence is that it's across system and across ecosystem, right? So it's not just in parts of your Mac, iPad, or iPhone, is across the whole device. And interestingly, to make you realize that they changed the logo of Siri, now becoming like a border around your device instead of a separate logo. And that visually really makes you realize that is about everything on the device. And then the other part is that is across devices as well and across ecosystems. So I think that's what they were waiting for, coming in with an end-to-end solution that ties you into their ecosystem even more.
Talk to me too about when you talk about the naming of things that Apple does. I mean, they tend to have a very sort of, I mean, unless you're talking about things like Core ML or the neural engine, they tend to have a naming thing that's very accessible to the consumer,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of goes to where Apple was in the day. I mean, they were a consumer electronics company. Yes, they made computers, and yes, they made Power Macs or Mac Pros and things like that. But, 9 times out of 10, 99 out of 100, you're the person who keeps track of stats. You could tell me it was going to be a consumer that was buying it and not a business. As recently as 2003, I had a boss who was telling me that Macs were overpriced toys. And if you wanted to do real work, you need to be on a Windows machine.
Mm-hmm.
Flash forward, however many years, more years than I like to think, they have a place, I believe, in the enterprise, but that's kind of been born of talking to me, right? Not talking to the people who did my buying at my corporation. I mean, it was really about, they've sort of found their way into the enterprise through the consumer, have they not?
They did. They certainly found their way into the enterprise, mostly thanks to the iPhone and how penetrating now the iPhone is. That was the easiest way to have a BYOD device into the enterprise. And then from there, the iPad had a role to play. And now we have the Mac. And I think that, they've proven over time that, and it's interesting because if you go back last year at WWDC when the Vision Pro came out, as far as I can remember, that was the first time I actually heard Apple start talking about a new product from an enterprise perspective, because that's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And there, to me, it was obvious how they're thinking about Vision Pro as their moment to own the next era of computing within an enterprise and a consumer angle, right? Or market. And so I do think that they're way more interested in enterprises than they were. Um, but they're still true to who they are, which is talking to me as a user first, and then the ITDM. What they're doing is that if you're looking at Business Essential, for instance, for the devices side, is making it easier to for the ITDM to let me use whatever it is that I want to use, whether it is a Mac or an iPhone within an enterprise context, but still talking to me as a user first. And I think that is core to where AI, whether it is Apple Intelligence or, Copilot Plus, whatever it is that you want to call Gemini, there's a play for both, right? It matters to me as a user within an enterprise context, and it matters to my ITDM. So that's where I think with AI, you have that double. It's not just about, how a device is better than another from a design perspective or an OS perspective. Is really about the fact that AI bridges even more my personal and my work time.
I want to go back to some of what Apple introduced as far as Apple Intelligence. Speaking of naming, they don't have artificial intelligence; they have Apple Intelligence because that's $50 more probably. I don't know.
But it's also, I think, is also I think about how they think about the technology. The fact that it is set around privacy. It is about making it personal to you. It is about making it easy for you. So I think that the name itself is also a way to say, okay, this is done our way versus what somebody else might give you.
Well, sure, and it goes back to what you said earlier about, I mean, people have a trust with Apple. I mean, I know,
Right.
and I talked about this, I can't remember on some show. I haven't used ChatGPT. I haven't used ChatGPT because
What?
I have not been interested in giving my information to a company that I really don't know that much about, nor do I know what they're going to do with it. But
Right.
I'm talking to you on a Mac. There's an iPhone sitting right there. There's another Mac over there. I'm steeped in Apple, and so when they came and they said, first of all, we're doing it, it's like, okay, well, that makes me trust it a bit more. And then when they said, and you can use it without an account, I'm in. I'm in at least to try it. Whether I'm going to, stick with it, I would imagine I will, but I don't know. See, here's the thing. And I wanted to go to you about this part. I like to write. I like to write, and I'm not overly interested in having AI do that for me. I also like to draw, but I'm not that good at it. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
okay with AI trying that for me. I found it interesting that the things that Apple said, here are these pictures you can do, and you can do this thing that doesn't look photorealistic at all, or this thing that doesn't look photorealistic at all, or this thing that doesn't look photorealistic at all. Talk to me about that decision. Is that a privacy or a safety, or is that a concern? Is that Apple showing, yeah, all the stuff that you're afraid of, we're not really interested in doing that. Here's some fun that you can have, but we're not
I
giving
see
you
what you're saying.
photorealistic. Yeah.
Yeah. So versus the realistic avatar that we are seeing
Yeah,
come out from
I
other
can't do
apps.
a
Yeah.
picture like with you and me in Tahiti. I
Actually
can't
look
do that
like.
with this. Right. I could do a cartoon of you and me in Tahiti with
Yeah,
Apple
I do
Intelligence,
think
but
there's a trust part in there, for sure. I think that they we go back to your point earlier about, well, I'm going to start playing with that, and when in a year time they might decide that they can do a realistic picture of me, I'll be okay by then.
hmm,
But you are really taking people on a journey, and I also think that the technology, as far as a realistic picture, is not ready yet. I mean, I played around, as many have as well, with some of those pictures to get a headshot instead of actually getting a real photographer. And three are fine, and then fourth one, all of your hand has an extra finger, or there's your eyes are not your color, or whatever the case might be. So we are not quite there yet.
hmm.
And Apple has always been conservative as far as how much they push certain technology, unless there's a real benefit, I think, to consumer, then they're willing to make a market for it. And we've seen that, I think, on the health side, on Apple Watch, for instance. But do we need an AI today that makes a realistic picture of me? And I trust it? No, not really, because the trust is definitely not there.
Right. I sometimes my head swims, like I'll see a picture online. It's like, oh, I wonder. Okay, and then you have to check the source and all that. And wow, that, again, that's another thing for another thing, which I hope I can talk to you again sometime about that. Let's talk though now. And every time I ask you a question, I feel like I'm saying, I don't know. AI feels to me like a rest of our lives thing. And I'm not saying that with any kind of trepidation or any kind of fear. I'm saying this is not a quarter to quarter thing.
Oh, for sure.
And yet you did have a bunch of financial analysts, obviously, when Apple introduced their AI or Apple Intelligence, whatever you want to call it. When Apple introduced their AI intelligence, Apple Intelligence play, the immediate question is, all right, so how many iPhones are we selling in September? How many iPhones are we selling by December? And I guess as base, as crass as that sounds, is this going to set up a super cycle? Because this is a thing that a lot of people,
No,
you don't think so.
I don't think so. Simply because it's English only for now.
Okay.
So that already is limiting the number of countries where this is going to be as a service being rolled out. Now, obviously, all the new phones are going to have a new NPU and a new chip. And so, there are going to be consumers that are going to invest in future proving their iPhone experience. So, will I see a replacement cycle that may be stronger than last year? Possibly, especially in markets like North America, the UK. But it's not going to be a super cycle. What I think is going to happen, though, is that you're going to have more tie into the ecosystem. And you might end up actually seeing consumers thinking about the Mac plus the iPhone more than they have in the past. So more devices for per user. And then once, the technology rolls out to other markets, we'll see. But, it's hard to do a super cycle when, China's not going to be part of it. Considering how much of Apple's overall sales happen in that market.
That's, yeah, well, that's really interesting. And I feel bad that I kind of forgot about that part of it. But yeah, okay. I'm curious. Well, you, like Ben and like other analysts, just kind of blow my mind when we talk, which is very professional sounding, but that's kind of where I am right now. All right, so this was the AI WWDC. We know that, and yet there was probably 45 minutes before they got to Apple
I
Intelligence.
know.
And I have a hard time keeping track of most of what was said outside of that because that was our focus. Probably starting in February when Tim Cook said, and we've got some really great AI stuff that we're looking forward to telling you about later this year. There was other stuff announced though and introduced. Is there anything to you that stands out of the other things outside of Apple Intelligence, or is there no longer any such thing? And yeah, that'll be interesting because Apple Intelligence. That'll be interesting because Apple Intelligence. What
No,
outside
I
of
do
that?
think that,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I think there was a lot of value that came from the upgrades across all the products. That to me, the theme that I would put under is personalization, especially we've seen on the iPhone with iOS 18, that really, and yes, all the Android folks are like, yes, you're getting everything that we've been having for years, which is true, but a lot of more personalization in the look and feel of the device, and as well as obviously it's WWDC, so it's all about the developers, right? So the ability for developers to take advantage of some of the features, and if you ask me, I don't know, even last year, that I would see anything but the torch and the camera as my short key on the device, on standby. I was like, no. And now here we are with, I can put whatever I want. And I'm looking forward putting my Rivian app on one of those buttons so I can open my car without having to do three steps. So I think there is a reason or at least I like to think that the reason why we're seeing it now is not just because they can finally do it, is because it makes perfect sense when you're thinking about AI being a personalized experience and Siri being able to take advantage of the whole system, not just certain functions. So you can't tell me that AI is going to personalize my experience, but then still limiting me as a user as to how I want my phone to look, right? So I
Right.
think that is all going hand in hand.
That's a really interesting idea. I also like the idea. Are you you remember what a mood ring is, right?
I do
No.
not.
Oh, okay. Well, they were big in the '70s here in the States. I don't know,
Okay.
but it was a thing. Basically, it was temperature activated. But the
Oh.
conceit was, you wore this ring, and if you were in a bad mood, it might turn black, or if you were in a good mood,
Oh,
it
I
might turn.
remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yes,
right.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I love the idea that that's what Siri's going to turn your phone into one day. You're going to look at your phone and be like, "Why is my screen blue?" Oh, well, come to think of it, so am I. I got
Well, I don't know. I think that's a plus for people that deal with me because they'll see it red most of the time. So
That's great. You just walk into the office and hold up your phone. It's like, and
it's
that's all
not
you
the
do.
day,
Just
not today.
shake your head angrily, maybe wag your finger a little bit, and let people know that today you mean business. I gotta say, I I am so happy to have talked to you. I hope we can do it again sometime. Do me a favor,
Absolutely.
because you mentioned that you wrote an article for Creative Strategies. If you want people to keep up specifically with what you're doing, are there socials that you send them to? Is there a website you'd like them to go to? Where would you like people to find more?
So if you're interested in anything technology, creativestrategies.com is where I post most of my writing. If you are more interested into the societal side and ESG, is theheartoftech.com. On social media across everything from X to uh, uh, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, I am Caro underscore Milanesi, Milanesi. And I'm on LinkedIn too under my name.
Just a true pleasure to talk to you, and I do hope we can do it again sometime. Carolina, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.